Society and culture were a huge factor in the 80s, filled with tons of drama and many ups and downs. However, it would be one of the greatest decades in U.S. history. There were major social and cultural issues at the time with the AIDS epidemic and the wealth gap. The AIDS epidemic was a massive topic of importance in the 80s. Lots of people died, religion was questioned, hygiene and cleanliness would be improved, and it made people realize that they need to use protection to be safe. The wealth gap was also drastic in the 80s. During this time, you were either rich or poor. There was no in between. Aside from the social and cultural issues, literature also played a key piece in the 80s. Graffiti art and neo-conceptual art were two major artistic movements during this time. Two important pieces of literature during this time were a book called What We Talk About When We Talk About Love by Raymond Carver and The Color Purple by Alice Walker. People fell in love with Carver's short stories and was very well known as an influential American writer because of his works. At the time, short stories weren't a big deal, but Carver wanted to revive them and bring them back into the light, which made him so well known. The Color Purple by Alice Walker would also be known for its portrayal of an African American woman who dealt with domestic abuse and lesbian relationships. Because of this, it led to Walker winning the National Book Award as well as the Pulitzer Prize. Two popular movies at the time were The Empire Strikes Back and Scarface. The Empire Strikes Back is a Star Wars film that made big headlines, released on May 21st, 1980. It was futuristic and used new types of technology in the film industry. The director was Irvin Kershner, and he had a great cast supporting his every move, some who are still in some of the movies to this day. Mark Hamill, who played Luke Skywalker, Harrison Ford as Han Solo, Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia, Billy D. Williams as Lando Calrissian, David Prowse as Darth Vader, Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anthony Daniels as C-3PO, Peter Mayhew as Chewbacca, Kenny Baker as R2-D2, Frank Oz as Yoda, and Jeremy Bulloch as Boba Fett. Scarface was a movie built around a Cuban immigrant who fled to Miami, who would later become one of the most notorious drug dealers known to mankind. Released on December 9th, 1983. The director was Brian De Palma, who also had a great cast. Al Pacino as Tony Montana, Michelle Pfeiffer as Elvira Hancock, Stephen Bauer as Manny Rivera, Robert Loggia as Frank Lopez, Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio as Gina Montana. Aside from the film industry, TV shows were also significant at the time. The two most popular TV shows during this time period would be Dallas and MASH. Dallas is revolved around the family oil company where lust and greed get the better of the Ewing family, which leads to lots of drama and suspension in a show that will last many years, which made it memorable and impacted the 80s heavily. It lasted from April 2nd, 1978 till May 3rd, 1991. Larry Hagman played John Ross Ewing, Linda Gray as Sue Ellen Ewing, Victoria Principal as Pamela Barnes Ewing, Patrick Duffy as Bobby Ewing, Charlene Tilton as Lucy Ewing, Omri Katz as John Ross Ewing III, Priscilla Presley as Jenna Wade, Barbara Bell Geddes as Ewing Farlow, Jim Davis as Jock Ewing, Steve Kennelly as Ray Krebs, and Ken Kirkvall as Cliff Barnes. The other show, MASH, was revolved around the Korean War and focused on a specific group during the war known as the 4077th Mobile Army Surgical Hospital Care Unit. This group, filled with both men and women, used humor in an attempt to lift the spirits from the depressing and tragic war. Released on September 17, 1972, all the way till February 28, 1993. 11 years of great TV. Alan Alda as Hawkeye Pierce, Loretta Swit as Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan, Jamie Farr as Sergeant Maxwell Q. Killinger, William Christopher as Father Francis Mulkey, Harry Morgan as Colonel Sherman T. Potter, Mike Farrell as Captain B.J. Honeycutt, Kelly Nakahara as Lieutenant Kelly Yamato, Gary Berghoff as Radar, David Ogden Stiers as Major Charles Winchester, and Larry Linville as Major Franklin Burns. Music also had a great impact on people's lives back then. John Lennon, the star from the Beatles, was a rock pop artist who was very well known for his song Imagine. NWA was a group composed of 7 guys who started to shine the light on hip-hop music. The 7 members were Ice Cube, Eazy-E, Dr. Dre, DJ Yella, MC Ren, The Doc, and The Arabian Prince. Their most famous song was Straight Outta Compton. Sports was also a big aspect at the time. The 49ers dominated the 80s winning the Super Bowl 5 times out of their 6 appearances. They would be known as one of the NFL's super teams, winning their Super Bowl in '82. However, the most memorable sports event to occur during this time period would be the Miracle on Ice. This was when the underdog U.S. hockey team would defeat the prominent Soviet Union in Lake Placid, New York during the Olympics. No one believed that the U.S. could have done it with a roster full of college kids, but they did it anyways and would go on to win the gold medal. All in all, the 80s were a standpoint in culture and society, with many ups and downs and great historic moments.
During the start of the 1980s, the United States economy was under a severe recession. At the time, business bankruptcies rates had increased. But around 1983, the economy began improving and prospered as the annual inflation remained under 5% up until the 1990s. Moreover, the 1970s signified the end of the post-World War II economic boom. This era overall went through high inflation and unemployment, as well as seeping into the early 1980s. It was then Reagan implemented his economic program that would repeal the ongoing recession. It would soon enforce lower tax rates so people can maintain their income. Basically, supply-side economics produced more savings, production, investment, and paved the way for a stronger economic growth. The tax cuts eventually benefited the rich and induced a chain reaction as well. Additionally, it helped lower income earners along with higher levels of investment that opened doors to new job wages and higher openings. The Federal Reserve was consistent in controlling price increases and also increasing interest rates whenever a threat loomed by, and yet there were a number of economics that feared government spending and borrowing would only temporarily stop inflation. In summary, the Federal Reserve served as the economic traffic cop. The Reagan Revolution fixated on reducing government spending, taxes, etc. His philosophy basically was government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. He was also a supporter of laissez-faire economics. During the recession, he would aggressively cut income taxes from 70% to 28%. He declares he would also slow government, deregulate business industries, and advocated for the Federal Reserve to fight against inflation by decreasing money supply. In 1982, Congress passed the Job Training Partnership Act. It implemented job training programs for low-income citizens. In the end, Reagan was congratulated for his efforts in getting rid of the Nixon-era price controls. The free market equilibrium was previously constrained that would have evaded inflation eventually. Reagan eliminated restraints on oil, gas, long-distance calling, and television, and as well as deregulating other services such as bus and overseas shipping.
The 1980s was a time of innovation, good fortune for Americans after the Vietnam War and economic downfall of the 70s. Politics played a major role in the restoration of America's economy and prosperity through the passing of many acts and policies. During 1980, Jimmy Carter was president of the United States until his loss against Ronald Reagan in the 1980 election. Carter was the Democratic Party candidate, while Reagan was the Republican Party candidate. Reagan won the election by a landslide with 489 electoral votes to Carter's 49. During 1980, the Democratic Party had a majority in both House of Representatives and the House of Senate. But after the 1980 election, the Republican Party gained a majority in the Senate while the House remained Democratic. Reagan introduced many issues that were discussed by the public during his presidency. Two of the many include his economic program and strategic forces funding. Reagan's economic program, dubbed Reaganomics, was a conservative economic policy that addressed the 1980 recession. Reaganomics is based on a theory of supply-side economics, also called trickle-down economics. Reagan pledged to make cuts in both income and capital tax gains, regulations of businesses, money growth in the economy, and cuts on government spending on domestic programs. This followed the greed is good spirit of 1980s America. Since the start of his presidency, Reagan has continuously risen the military budget and spending on nuclear arms. During 1983, $22 billion was granted towards the strategic forces, with an appropriation of $30 billion for the next year by the Defense Department. Strategic forces include bombers, various missiles, air defenses, warning systems, and communications. These funds were thought to be necessary to continue Reagan's program of modernizing the nation's strategic deterrent, a $180 billion plan introduced in 1981. Important pieces of legislation passed in the early 80s include the Nuclear Waste Policy Act and the National Drinking Age Act. The Nuclear Waste Policy Act was passed in 1982 and established a complex program for the construction of a geological depository in the United States. This program required the Department of Energy to locate and develop a site by 1998. Such site would be used for the construction and disposal of high-level radioactive waste and spent nuclear fuel. In 1987, Congress passed an amendment designating Yucca Mountain in Nevada as a chosen site. The National Drinking Age Act, passed on July 17, 1984, raised the federal minimum drinking age to 21. States were given 2 years to raise the drinking age to 21. While many states and restaurant industries opposed this act, polls showed that more than 3/4 of the American public are in favor of raising the drinking age. One major Supreme Court decision during 1980-84 was the Illinois v. Gates case. This decision was issued on June 8, 1983, and ruled in favor of the state. This case was fought over lands of Susan Gates' Fourth Amendment rights when the home was searched based on an anonymous letter the police department of Bloomingdale's received. Reagan's foreign policy included taking a more aggressive stance towards the Soviets and military involvement in Lebanon. Reagan backed away from the language of taunt that stressed the easing hostility and strained relations between nations. He made his distrust of the Soviets clear, and during the first years of his presidency, Soviet-American relations were unstable. By 1983, in height of the nuclear arms deployments of both America and Russia, Reagan announced his plan for a missile defense system called the Strategic Defense Initiative. In late 1983, relations had reached a tipping point, and military exercises were deployed by America in case of surprise nuclear attack. By 1982, the Reagan administration was drawn into military involvement in Lebanon due to the belief that the United States had national interests in the region to combat Soviet influence. The U.S., who initially attempted to work out peace in Lebanon, became involved in a civil war. During the summer of 1983, American forces were constantly under attack by Lebanese terrorists, with a deadly attack occurring on October 23, 1983, when terrorists blew up a Marine barrack, killing 241 U.S. servicemen. Reagan subsequently called it the saddest day of my presidency, the saddest day of my life. In February 1984, the Marines withdrew from Lebanon. The early 1980s were a time of economic reconstruction and international restlessness for America.